Margaret Brennan joins us now from the White House. So, Margaret, where does the FBI's investigation into these Gulen-linked charter schools stand today?
Well, it's ongoing, Vlad, and we also know that in a number of states there are audits underway in regard to some of these issues on an accounting basis in terms of how public schools, charter schools, and their funding was used to basically keep the money within a tightly knit network of followers of Gulen to businesses run by them. And so there's some ongoing probe on that front at the same time that you have those teachers we told you about, particularly Ersan Konkur, who has helped to turn over evidence that he said he collected. His employers are dismissing his allegations. They accused him without evidence of being an agent of the Turkish government. He denies that claim, though he has told us that he has spoken with lawyers who work for the Turkish government. So to be clear here, you have a U.S. investigation with the FBI happening in parallel to this international pressure being put on the Trump administration and before that the Obama administration to extradite Fethullah Gulen because of these allegations that he's either a terrorist or, as his followers say, simply being used as a scapegoat for Turkey's power-hungry leader. Either way, it puts a U.S. resident, which Gulen is, in a very international-based conflict and crisis here.
Can you give us a little more background on Gulen? I'm really curious as to how he ended up living here in the U.S.
Well, cleric Fethullah Gulen came to the United States in about 1999, I believe, and he did that, established residency here, something that some former U.S. officials helped him to get status. But he came here in part because he was having problems back in Turkey. Now, as a cleric, he's got some very dedicated followers, and at the time before he left Turkey, he was actually aligned in many ways with its current leader, Erdogan. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has increasingly gained power in the past few years. He's increasingly been blurring the lines between a sharp distinction of church and state, which has really been part of the founding of the modern state of Turkey. And he's really also increased his power. Some say leaned more towards authoritarian in recent years. So political allies of yesterday are not necessarily those today. And in fact, now, since that July failed coup attempt, the Erdogan government has been jailing en masse followers of Fethullah Gulen and accusing people of being followers of Fethullah Gulen, saying that this is part of sort of a fifth column of people who have infiltrated the police and other state institutions to challenge Erdogan and his power. So you can see that whether it is rightly placed or not, the current leader of Turkey views this cleric, who is elderly, who is sick, who is living in this Pennsylvania compound, as a direct political threat to him.
So, Margaret, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Turkey to discuss the fight against ISIS. What's the status of this extradition request from Turkey, and will the investigation by the FBI complicate the talks between Secretary of State Tillerson and Turkish officials?
Well, Vlad, this is one of the most complicated relationships there is right now. Turkey is a NATO ally. That means the U.S. is militarily bound to help defend it at the same time that the U.S. is pushing Turkey to take more of a direct and helpful role in the fight against ISIS. Remember, it shares that border with Syria, and closing off its border, which has been relatively porous in the past few years to ISIS fighters, has been a real source of conflict and irritation. While they are working together now, the U.S. is using air bases in Turkey to stage bombing raids onto ISIS territory. That is key. That makes them so central to America's success in this fight, which is why it puts the Trump administration in sort of an uncomfortable place when Turkish officials repeatedly request that if the U.S. is truly an ally in the fight against terror, that they would turn over Fethullah Gulen because they view him as an enemy of the state. Of course, U.S. officials, including Attorney General Jeff Sessions, have promised to review this case, review the request for extradition, something he said just last week. Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, is expected to once again hear questions about this when he hits the ground. So the Turkish government is really trying to, in many ways, test America's friendship around how they respond to these demands to hand over this Turkish cleric. But in the meantime, the Obama administration and now the Trump administration is also trying to explain that the U.S. has its own investigations, its own court system, and we have extradition policies. You can't just hand someone over if your friend demands it, which is what Turkey is expecting here. And this came up just last week when it was revealed in the Wall Street Journal that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn actually was discussing how to bypass U.S. courts to turn over Gulen while he was working as an agent of the Turkish government. Michael Flynn, of course, registered, declaring himself as such. So this is something that really has eaten into so much of the bilateral relationship, and it could have implications. At a minimum, it's a source of irritation in a relationship that needs to get tighter and more friendly if the fight against ISIS is going to continue.
All right, Margaret Brennan, thanks a lot. Fascinating story.